The snow was already deep when she spotted him, a black shape crumpled against the wind, barely moving. Her boots crunched faster, her breath spilling white into the air, until she saw the shallow rise and fall of his chest. His paw shifted weakly, almost reaching toward her, and when she took it in her gloved hand, he didn't pull away. He just held on, like she was the one he'd been waiting for. The wind cut straight through her coat, the kind of cold that made skin sting and lungs ache, but she barely noticed. Her focus was on the dark shape in the snow ahead, not a branch, not a shadow. A dog. She slowed at first, unsure if he was alive, her boots sinking into the drifted edges of the roadside. The flakes coming down now were large and wet, sticking to her hat, her eyelashes. Every breath was a cloud. She could hear the hiss of wind through the bare treetops above the road, but the animal didn't stir. When she was close enough, she crouched low, boots squeaking in the packed snow beneath her. The dog was huge, lean muscle under thick black fur, the kind of working dog you didn't usually see loose out here. His flank rose and fell, but barely. His paw twitched, claws scraping the ice under him. "Hey," she whispered, keeping her voice low, calm. She didn't want to startle him if he was conscious enough to react. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, he shifted his head, dark eyes meeting hers. They weren't wild. Tired, yes, wary, but not the eyes of a feral animal. She reached out a hand slowly, letting him smell the glove first. His breath was warm against her fingers, faint but steady. Then, as if the movement cost him more than he could afford, he lifted one paw and set it lightly in her palm. The weight of it surprised her. Solid. Warm even through the damp fur. He didn't pull back. "You're freezing," she murmured. "And you're hurt." She glanced along his side, spotting the patch of fur matted with blood just above his shoulder. Not fresh, darkened, the edges crusted, but still damp in the center. Her breath hitched. If he'd been out here like this for long, he wouldn't last the night. She slid her arm under his chest, testing his weight. He groaned low, a sound of pain but not aggression, his head resting briefly against her shoulder as she adjusted her grip. "Come on," she said. "We're getting you out of here." The road was quiet, no cars, no distant hum of engines. She'd walked the half-mile stretch between her house and the old post office enough times to know no one was likely to pass soon. Carrying him all the way wasn't an option, not in the deepening snow, not with her boots slipping every few steps. She settled for coaxing him up, letting him lean against her hip. He was weak, but he moved with her, his steps slow but deliberate. They made it as far as the turn in the road before he stopped, ears flicking toward the tree line. His whole body stiffened, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. "What is it?" she asked softly, scanning the woods. The wind stirred the branches, snow falling in sudden clumps, but nothing moved beneath the trees. Still, he wouldn't take his eyes off the dark beyond the road. She tugged gently at his collar, or what was left of it. The leather was cracked, the buckle bent, and there was no tag. She knelt to adjust her grip, and his paw landed on her leg again, the weight deliberate this time. "Okay," she said, her voice low. "Let's go." They didn't look back toward the trees. By the time they reached her driveway, her thighs burned from the effort of half-carrying him, and her fingers were numb inside her gloves. The house stood in a pale pool of porchlight, the snow in the yard untouched since morning. She pushed the door open with her hip, guiding him inside. The heat from the small gas heater hit them instantly, fogging her glasses. She eased him down onto the old rug near the stove, pulling off her gloves. Up close, the wound looked worse, not from size, but from what it meant. The edges were too clean to be from a fall or branch. This was a cut from something sharp. She fetched a towel and a bowl of warm water, kneeling beside him again. He watched her without flinching, even when she touched the edge of the wound. "You've been through something," she murmured. Outside, the wind shifted. She barely noticed, but he did. His head snapped toward the front door, ears high, every muscle alert. And somewhere far off, past the field, she thought she heard it too, the faint crunch of footsteps in snow. Open. The sound came again, faint, deliberate, not wind, not the shifting of snow on branches. Someone was out there. The canine's body stayed low to the floor, but his eyes never left the door. His breathing had changed too, slower, deeper, like every inhale was measuring the distance to whatever he sensed. She stood, drying her hands on the towel without realizing she was holding her breath. Probably just a deer, she whispered, but the words sounded flat, even to her. He didn't look at her. His focus was absolute. She stepped toward the front window, brushing a layer of condensation from the glass. The porch light pooled yellow on the snow just a few feet from the house, then faded to darkness at the edge of the field. Beyond that, the tree line was just a jagged shadow against the pale sky. Nothing moved. Still, the dog's growl deepened, a sound so low it was almost a vibration in the floor. She backed away from the window and knelt beside him again. "Hey," she murmured, resting her hand on his paw. "It's okay. You're safe here." For the first time since she'd found him, he turned his head away from the door to look at her. It wasn't fear in his eyes. It was warning. She swallowed, a weight settling in her chest. He wasn't trying to calm himself, he was trying to tell her to be ready. Her phone was in the kitchen, charging. She forced herself to walk slowly, not wanting to spook him further, and unplugged it. No new messages, no calls. She dialed the local sheriff's non-emergency number anyway. It rang twice, then a tired male voice answered. "Sheriff's office." "Hi, this might sound strange, but I think someone's on my property." She kept her voice steady. "I'm at the old Bramble place on Creek Road. I found a dog, he's hurt, and he's acting like there's something outside." There was a pause on the line. "We've got a deputy about 15 minutes out. Stay inside, keep your doors locked." "Do you see anyone?" "No. But he hears them." "All right. Don't go outside. We'll send someone to check the perimeter." She hung up, setting the phone on the counter. 15 minutes. When she returned to the living room, the dog had moved. He was no longer lying down, he stood near the front door, his head low, tail still, the wound on his shoulder forgotten. She checked the locks, front and back, and pulled the curtains closed. The kettle on the stove began to hiss softly, steam curling into the air. She turned the knob down, the sound too loud in the otherwise quiet room. The quiet didn't last. From the side of the house came a single crunch, snow compacting under weight. Not a deer. Not the wind. The dog's ears flicked, head snapping toward the sound. He took one step toward the side wall, then another, each movement silent despite his size. Her pulse was in her throat now. She moved to the coat rack by the door, pulling down the heavy flashlight she kept for power outages. It felt small in her hand, but the solid weight was reassuring. The sound came again, closer this time. Slow. Measured. Whoever it was wasn't trying to hide, they wanted her to know they were there. She stayed back from the window, angling the curtain just enough to peek through the gap. Moonlight glinted off something at the edge of the porch, a boot, dark against the snow. She froze. The canine stepped forward until he was beside her leg, his shoulder brushing her knee. His body blocked most of the view through the glass, but his head was turned toward the porch, lips just barely pulled back from his teeth. The boot shifted. A second appeared beside it. Her grip on the flashlight tightened. The person was standing just outside the porch light, not moving forward, not knocking. Just waiting. Then, as if some unspoken signal had been given, the dog pressed forward until his nose touched the curtain. He gave a single, sharp bark, the sound explosive in the stillness, and the figure outside stepped back into the dark. She held her breath, straining to hear footsteps retreating, but there was nothing. Just the wind, and the faint creak of the porch boards settling after the weight left them. The dog stayed at the door, muscles rigid, eyes locked on the dark. Minutes stretched. The kettle clicked softly as the burner cooled. Somewhere in the distance, she thought she heard an engine turn over, but it was faint, muffled by snow. When the knock finally came, it was so soft she almost missed it. 3 gentle taps, like someone who didn't want to disturb her, or someone who wanted to be invited in. The dog's head tilted slightly, but he didn't move away from the door. Her phone buzzed on the counter, the sound sharp in the tense room. She snatched it up. A text from an unknown number, let him out. Her stomach turned cold. She looked at the dog. His eyes were on her now, steady, unblinking. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the loose gutter at the corner of the porch. But beneath it, she heard it again, the slow, deliberate crunch of footsteps moving around the house. The footsteps circled slowly, measured like a predator deciding which side of the pen to breach. The dog stayed close to the door, ears twitching toward each sound, shifting his weight so lightly the rug barely rustled beneath him. She backed toward the kitchen, her eyes never leaving the door. The phone in her hand felt useless. The deputy was still 10 minutes out, maybe more if the snow on Creek Road had drifted again. The stranger outside stopped moving. Silence pressed in, heavier than the wind. She strained to hear, the quiet making every other sound inside too loud, the hum of the gas heater, the faint ticking of the clock, her own heartbeat drumming in her ears. Then came a new sound, a long, slow scrape against the siding. Not nails, not claws, metal. Something sharp dragged deliberately along the wall. The dog's growl deepened, rolling low from his chest. He stepped forward, pressing his shoulder to the doorframe, positioning himself between her and whatever was outside. She swallowed hard. "What do they want with you?" she whispered, almost to herself. He didn't glance back, but his tail dropped low, stiff, not fear, not submission, but a readiness to act. Another text lit up her phone, "You have something that isn't yours." Her throat tightened. Fingers shaking, she typed back before she could second-guess it. "He's hurt. He's staying here until help comes." The reply came instantly, like they were standing with the phone in their hand, waiting. "That dog doesn't need your help. Open the door, and this ends now." She put the phone down. No more texting. They wanted her to react, wanted her to keep looking at that screen instead of what was outside. The scrape came again, closer now, along the window side of the living room. She turned her head toward it, and that was when the knock came from the back door. 3 taps. Slow. Even. Her skin prickled. There was no porch light in the back, only the kitchen's dim glow spilling across the floor. The dog didn't move toward the sound. Instead, he stayed at the front, every muscle locked, as if he knew which side was the real threat. She crept toward the back door anyway, the flashlight cold in her palm. She stopped 2 feet away, listening. The knock came again, softer this time, almost hesitant. She angled the beam of light toward the small square of frosted glass. Nothing. Then, as if her attention was the cue, something struck the glass hard from the outside, not enough to break it, but enough to make her jump back. In the front room, the dog barked once, sharp and deep. She turned in time to see him charge the window beside the front door, his body hitting the wall with a heavy thud. He was silent now, head lowered, teeth bared toward something just beyond the curtain. And then she saw it, a shadow against the fabric, tall and still, only the faintest movement breaking its outline. Her breath caught. The figure outside was close enough that the heat from inside the house had left a faint fog on the glass. The dog stayed there, staring them down through the thin barrier, his breath misting the air as it hit the cold pane. Slowly, the shadow shifted. A hand lifted into view, pressing flat against the glass. The fingers spread, pale against the darkness. She took a step back, heart hammering. Then the hand curled into a fist, and 2 slow knocks thudded through the glass. It was deliberate. Measured. Like they had all the time in the world. The dog didn't move. Didn't blink. Just stared. Finally, the shadow withdrew, melting back into the dark. She exhaled, only then realizing she'd been holding her breath. The silence after was worse, no footsteps, no wind. Just the deep, steady breathing of the dog and the sound of her pulse in her ears. She crossed to the window, careful to stay just out of direct sight, and pulled the curtain back an inch. Empty. She let it fall closed again, her hand gripping the fabric. "They're trying to make me open the door," she whispered. The dog stepped back from the glass, circling once before sitting beside her. For the first time since she brought him inside, he leaned into her leg, the weight grounding her. "I'm not going to," she said. "Not for them. Not for anyone." The minutes dragged. Then, from outside, came the faint but distinct sound of an engine starting. The growl was distant at first, then closer, moving past the house toward the main road. She didn't relax, not yet, but the dog's ears flicked, his gaze tracking the sound until it faded. Her phone buzzed once more on the counter. Against her better judgment, she checked it. "You've made this harder for both of you." Her stomach knotted. She put the phone face down, locking the door again even though she knew it had never been unlocked. The dog shifted, lying down near the front door, his body angled toward it as if ready to spring. His eyes closed, but the tension never left his frame. She sat on the couch, her coat still on, watching the snow build up against the porch. When the radio crackled 20 minutes later, announcing a patrol car was pulling into the driveway, she didn't move right away. She looked at the dog, still guarding the door, and whispered, "They'll be back, won't they?" He didn't open his eyes. But she already knew the answer. The crunch of tires on snow should have been a relief, but it didn't loosen the knot in her chest. She stayed by the couch until the red and blue lights flashed faintly through the curtains, strobing against the far wall. The dog didn't move from the door. His eyes were open now, trained on the sound of the vehicle outside. His tail stayed still, his posture tense, not the reaction she'd expect if he recognized help. A knock came, louder this time, accompanied by a man's voice. "Sheriff's office." She stood slowly, glancing at the dog. "It's okay," she whispered, though she wasn't sure she believed it yet. She crossed the room, keeping one hand near the lock, and peered through the small gap in the curtain. A uniformed man stood on the porch, breath fogging in the cold, the brim of his hat dusted with snow. A cruiser idled at the end of the drive, exhaust curling into the night. She opened the door just enough to keep the warmth in. "Deputy?" "Ma'am." He tipped his head, scanning the interior quickly before stepping inside. The dog rose immediately, planting himself between them. His hackles weren't up, but his stance said plainly he wasn't moving unless she told him to. The deputy froze, hands up slightly. "That the dog you called about?" "Yes." "He's hurt." "And someone was outside." The deputy's gaze shifted to her. "Did you see them?" "No. But they left footprints." "And she hesitated, glancing at the phone on the counter. "They sent me messages." The deputy's expression tightened. "Show me." She retrieved the phone, scrolling to the unknown number and handing it over. He read each text, his jaw tightening. "We've had reports of break-ins in the last week. Hunting cabins, mostly. Tools, food, anything useful in this weather. But this," he glanced at the dog. "This is different." "What do you mean?" He handed the phone back. "If they're sending you messages like that, they know you. Or they know him." She looked down at the K9, who hadn't moved from his spot between them. "You think they're after him?" The deputy crouched slightly, keeping his hands visible. "Easy, boy." He studied the dog's collar, the cracked leather and bent buckle. "This looks like an old service collar. Military or police issue. Could be he belonged to someone official before he got loose." She frowned. So whoever was outside might want him back for reasons that aren't good. The dog's eyes never left the deputy's face. It wasn't aggression, it was assessment, like he was weighing whether this man could be trusted. The deputy stood again. I'll check the perimeter. See where they went after they left your porch. I'm coming with you, she said without thinking. He shook his head. Stay inside. Lock the door behind me. The dog huffed, low and short, as if agreeing with the deputy's caution. She closed the door after him, turning the deadbolt, and went to the window. Through the gap in the curtain, she watched him sweep the porch light across the yard, pausing at the edge of the field. The beam caught a line of footprints heading toward the tree line, deep, clean impressions in the fresh snow. The deputy followed them a few yards, then stopped, scanning the woods. He didn't go in. Instead, he turned and came back to the porch, his boots crunching in the silence. When she opened the door again, he shook his head. Trail disappears about 30 yards out. Looks like they had a snowmobile stashed somewhere. No way to follow them tonight. Her stomach sank. So they could come back. He met her gaze. Yes. And if they want that dog, they will. The K9 stepped forward then, as if he understood the exchange, his paw brushing her boot. The deputy glanced down at him again. I'll put in a request for extra patrols along Creek Road. Keep your doors locked. Don't answer for anyone you don't know. And, he hesitated. If you can, keep him close. I have a feeling he's the reason you're still here tonight. She looked at the dog, and for a brief second, she could swear he looked back with the same thought. The deputy left, his cruiser's lights washing over the yard one last time before disappearing down the road. Inside, the quiet returned, but it felt heavier now, like the air itself was waiting for the next sound outside. The dog circled once and lay down near the door again, head resting on his paws but eyes open, watching. She sat beside him on the floor, her hand resting lightly on his back. His fur was warm under her palm, the steady rise and fall of his breathing oddly calming. You're not just some stray, are you? She whispered. His ear flicked at her voice, but he didn't move. For a long time, they stayed like that, the only two awake in the small house, listening to the snow fall against the windows and the wind hum through the bare trees. The house felt smaller after the deputy left, like the walls were leaning in, waiting for something. She stood in the kitchen, hands wrapped around a mug she wasn't drinking from, watching the K9 by the front door. He hadn't moved since the cruiser's taillights disappeared. He didn't look tired. He didn't look bored. He looked ready. It struck her then, the stillness wasn't laziness. It was discipline. This wasn't a dog lying down for comfort. This was a sentry holding position. She set the mug down and crossed the room slowly, crouching beside him. You've done this before, haven't you? She murmured. His head turned toward her, eyes catching the dim lamplight. There was no way he understood her words exactly, but there was something in the way he didn't blink, didn't shift, that made her feel like he understood enough. Her fingers brushed over the cracked leather of his collar again. The hardware was scuffed, but sturdy. She'd never seen one quite like it, wide, reinforced, the kind meant for working dogs, not pets. Her thumb caught on a deep scratch in the metal buckle. Not a chew mark. Something sharper. She moved her hand away and noticed a faint, irregular patch of fur just below his left ear, shorter, like it had grown back after being shaved for a medical procedure. What happened to you? She asked quietly. He didn't react, but the moment her voice softened, his tail gave one slow sweep along the floor. A small sound from the kitchen broke the moment. Not the heater. Not the kettle. Something else. She rose and stepped toward the counter, scanning for movement. The sound came again, faint, muffled, from the back door. She froze. The deputy had checked it. She'd locked it herself. But now, standing still, she could hear the faint rattle of the knob. The dog didn't bark. He stood, moving silently toward the kitchen, each step measured, the pads of his feet barely making a sound against the wood floor. She followed, her heart in her throat. The rattle stopped. They waited, listening. Then, a single tap against the glass. She glanced at the frosted pane, but there was only the blur of snow beyond. The dog stepped closer to the door, nose lifting slightly as he scented the air. His tail dropped lower. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She snatched it up, half expecting another text from the same number. It wasn't. This time it was a picture. Her breath caught. It was her house. Taken from the tree line. In the frame, she was visible through the kitchen window, the timestamp just 2 minutes ago. Her hands tightened around the phone. Whoever was out there was close enough to see her now. The dog's head snapped toward the front of the house suddenly, his ears swiveling toward something she couldn't hear. She followed him into the living room, moving quickly now. A shadow moved across the porch, just outside the curtain. Her pulse roared in her ears. The shadow stopped, angled toward the window. She backed toward the hallway. "Come on," she whispered, motioning the dog toward the bedroom where she kept the old hunting rifle her father had left behind. She'd never fired it outside of target practice, but the weight of it might be enough to make someone think twice. The dog didn't follow. He stayed rooted near the window, eyes locked on the shadow, his muscles coiled tight. "Come on," she urged, but he didn't move. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the shadow was gone. Silence pressed in again. She lowered the rifle once she had it in her hands, but didn't put it down. The dog finally turned toward her, his expression unreadable. Her phone buzzed again. Another picture. This one was closer. The focus wasn't the house this time, it was him. The black K9, visible through the gap in the curtain, his face turned toward whoever was holding the camera. Her stomach turned. They weren't just watching the house. They were watching him. She set the phone down, her hands trembling despite her grip on the rifle. The dog stepped toward her then, closing the space between them until his head was level with her arm. "You're not going anywhere," she said, more to herself than to him. "Not while I can stop it." Outside, the wind shifted, rattling the loose gutter again. But underneath it, just barely audible, came the faint hum of an engine starting in the distance. It faded quickly, swallowed by the snow. She didn't relax. Neither did he. They stood there together in the dim light, two silhouettes against the pale curtain, both knowing this wasn't over. The glow from the phone still lit the counter, the last photo burned into her mind. She turned it over so the screen faced down, as if that could make the image disappear. The rifle felt heavier now, the weight pressing into her palm with the kind of ache that meant her body was running on adrenaline alone. The dog stayed near the window for a moment longer before turning back to her, padding silently across the room. His paws barely made a sound against the wood floor. She knelt and met his gaze. "Who are they?" she whispered. "And what do they want with you?" He tilted his head slightly, the faintest flicker of curiosity in his eyes, before settling into a sit. The way he held himself, spine straight, ears alert, was military in its precision. She rose and went to the small desk in the corner, pulling her laptop from the drawer. The old machine hummed to life slowly, the screen taking its time to brighten. She tapped at the keys with fingers that still trembled. The unknown number sat in her message history like a threat in plain sight. She copied it into a reverse lookup site, knowing it was a long shot. No name. No city. No anything. Just unlisted. She tried another. This one spit out something, or almost something. The carrier was tied to a small town nearly 50 miles north, a place she'd driven through twice in her life without stopping. The name of the provider was one of those no-frills prepaid companies, the kind you could buy in cash at a gas station. Her stomach sank. Whoever they were, they didn't want to be found. A faint noise broke her focus, the sound of claws on the hardwood. She turned in time to see the dog walking toward the back hallway. He paused, glanced over his shoulder at her, and then continued toward the storage room she rarely used. She followed, the rifle still in hand. The storage room was dark, the air colder here. He stopped in the middle of the floor, nose close to a section of the wall. His breath fogged faintly in the beam of light from the hallway. "What is it?" she asked. He pawed once, lightly, at the baseboard. Then again, harder this time. She set the rifle against the doorframe and crouched. The wood here looked different, older, worn in a way the rest of the baseboard wasn't. She pressed her palm to it and felt the faintest draft. Her mind flashed to stories her father used to tell about old houses in this part of the county, about hidden spaces built in for smuggling or keeping valuables out of sight. She tapped the wood. Hollow. Grabbing a screwdriver from the workbench in the hall, she wedged it between the wall and the baseboard. The wood gave with a reluctant creak, pulling free in a long, narrow piece. Behind it was a dark gap, about a foot high and several feet wide, just enough for someone to store something long-term. The smell hit her first, not rot, but the faint tang of leather and something chemical. She reached in carefully and pulled out a canvas-wrapped bundle. Dust coated the fabric, clinging to her fingers. When she unwrapped it, her breath caught. Inside was a harness, heavy-duty, black nylon with reinforced stitching, patches still clinging to the sides. One of them bore a faded emblem she didn't recognize, the other simply read K9 unit in block letters. She looked up at the dog. His eyes were on the harness, not her. The moment she lifted it, his posture changed, more alert, ears forward, tail still. Not excitement exactly, but recognition. "This is yours," she whispered. She turned the harness over, noticing a small zippered pocket sewn into the underside. She pulled it open and found an ID tag, scratched and worn but still legible enough to read. Handler, Sergeant Daniel Rourke. K9, Thor. Her pulse quickened. She'd never heard the name before, but the formality of it told her this wasn't just any working dog. "Thor," she said softly, testing the name. His head lifted. Just a fraction, but enough to tell her he'd heard it before. She set the harness aside and picked up the rifle again, her eyes drifting back to the open gap in the wall. If this was here, what else had been hidden? A second reach into the space turned up nothing but dust and a torn scrap of paper. The ink had bled too much to make out any words, but the corner of a printed seal was still visible. Government issue, maybe. She sat back on her heels. If whoever was outside knew what she had here, they weren't just some random thieves. And if the deputy was right, if they were willing to send threats and stalk the house in the dark, they wouldn't stop until they got him. Thor moved closer, sitting beside her, his body warm against her arm. She looked at him and, for the first time since he'd appeared at her door, felt a clear and heavy truth settle in her chest. "They're not getting you back." Outside, the wind shifted again. Somewhere far off, she thought she heard that same low engine hum from earlier. This time, it didn't fade right away. The low hum pressed at the edges of her hearing, faint, steady, like it was content to stay just far enough away to be unnerving. She stood in the storage room doorway, the rifle balanced in her hands, Thor at her side. His head was high now, ears pricked, nostrils flaring like he was pulling the sound apart in his mind, measuring it. Her instinct was to call the deputy, but her gut said the time it would take for him to get here was time she didn't have. Whoever was out there had gotten close enough for photographs before. Now, with the sound growing ever so slightly louder, it felt like they were testing the edges, seeing how close they could come before she'd react. She crossed to the front window, pulling the curtain just an inch to look out. Snow still fell in lazy spirals under the porch light. The driveway was empty. No headlights, no movement. Thor didn't follow her to the window. Instead, he moved toward the hallway, his nails clicking once against the wood before going silent on the braided rug. He stopped at the back door, the one that had rattled earlier, and stared at it. Her phone sat on the counter. She grabbed it, hesitating over the keypad. Her thumb hovered over the deputy's number, but something stopped her, that gnawing sense that whoever was doing this wasn't going to be scared off by another visit from law enforcement. The hum deepened, the kind of change that meant the engine was either shifting gears or turning slightly. Thor's tail dropped lower. She glanced toward the back door. The window and it was too small to see much, just the edge of the yard and the start of the tree line. Then the hum cut off. The silence was worse. Thor moved closer to the door, standing perfectly still, his head tilted slightly to one side like he was pinpointing something she couldn't hear. Her pulse quickened. "What is it?" she whispered. No movement. No answer. Then, 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the back door. She tightened her grip on the rifle, the stock pressing firmly against her shoulder. Another knock. Louder this time. Thor's gaze never left the door. Her phone buzzed again. She didn't want to look, but she couldn't stop herself. Another photo. This one from the backyard. She could see Thor through the glass of the door, this exact moment, his body between her and whoever stood just inches away on the other side. Her stomach turned. She hadn't even heard footsteps in the snow. She backed up 1 step, raising the rifle slightly. "You need to go," she called, her voice steadier than she felt. No answer. Thor stepped forward until his nose was almost touching the door. His body was rigid now, every muscle poised. And then, in a movement so fast she almost missed it, his head turned sharply to the left, toward the side of the house. She moved to the nearest window, peering out just in time to catch a shadow slipping along the siding, heading toward the front. Thor was already moving, silent as a shadow himself, crossing the room toward the front door. She followed, the rifle heavy in her hands. The porch was empty. Her phone buzzed again. Another picture. This time, of her, taken through the narrow gap she'd made earlier in the curtain. Her breath caught. Whoever it was had been at the porch a second ago, close enough to see the smallest details. Thor's breathing had changed now, slower, deeper, like he was holding something in reserve. He moved toward the far corner of the room, where the wall met the baseboard heater, and stood there, waiting. She didn't understand, until she heard it. A faint creak. From under the floor. Her chest tightened. The house had a crawl space. She'd never been down there herself, but she'd seen the hatch in the mudroom floor. Thor moved toward it now, standing over the hatch like a soldier on post. Her hands tightened on the rifle. She crossed to the mudroom, flicked on the light, and stared at the square of wood set into the floorboards. The creak came again, softer this time, almost cautious. Thor's eyes locked on the hatch. His tail was still, his weight balanced forward, ready. She took a slow breath. If someone was under there, they weren't going to stay hidden for long. The creak came again, slower now, like whoever was down there had frozen, unsure if they'd been heard. Thor's body stiffened further, and for the first time since he'd appeared at her door, he made a sound. Not a bark, not even a growl at first, just a low rumble deep in his chest, so low it was more felt than heard. She tightened her grip on the rifle. "Who's down there?" she called, her voice sharper than she intended. Silence. The hum of the overhead light felt deafening now. She took a step forward, the floorboard groaning under her weight. Thor's head dipped, his ears pressing forward, every muscle in his legs tense like he might spring at any moment. Then, a single, sharp tap from beneath the hatch. Her stomach flipped. It wasn't the random creak of old wood. It was deliberate. She swallowed hard, taking another step toward the hatch. "I have a gun," she warned. "If you're under there, you need to say something." Now. Nothing. The tap came again. Thor's growl deepened, vibrating through the narrow room. She flicked the latch that kept the hatch shut and crouched down slowly, rifle balanced against her shoulder. She hesitated, her free hand hovering over the handle. The air felt heavier here, colder, as if the floor itself was breathing something stale up through the cracks. Thor leaned forward, his nose just inches from the wood, that low rumble still steady in his chest. Her hand closed around the handle. She took a breath and pulled. The hatch lifted with a reluctant groan, the stale air rushing up to meet her. Thor's growl became sharp, his front paws gripping the floor beside the opening. She aimed the flashlight beam down. The narrow crawl space stretched under the house, shadows pooling in every corner. The beam caught on something just a few feet from the hatch, a shape hunched low to the ground. It moved. "Stop," she snapped, rifle steady. The figure froze. The beam of light revealed a gloved hand, fingers curled against the dirt. "Who are you?" she demanded. No answer. The hand shifted slightly, and she caught the faint gleam of something metallic in its grasp. "Drop it," she ordered. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the metal clinked softly against the dirt floor. She kept the rifle trained, her other hand steadying the flashlight. "Why are you under my house?" The figure shifted again, enough for her to catch a glimpse of the face, partially covered by a black balaclava. The eyes that met hers were pale, cold, and entirely without panic. That was worse than fear. "You know the dog," she said quietly, almost certain before the words left her mouth. The man didn't blink. Thor barked once, sharp, deafening in the small space, and the man flinched just enough to break the stillness. He moved fast, scrambling backward through the dirt. "Hey," she called, leaning over the opening. Her flashlight beam caught the far wall just in time to see the man disappear through a gap that led to the foundation's outer edge. Thor lunged forward, paws braced on the hatch frame, barking in short, furious bursts. She lowered the rifle but didn't put it down. Her pulse hammered in her ears. Thor dropped back, pacing tight circles in the small mudroom before stopping to stare at the back door again. She followed his gaze, stepping slowly toward the window. Nothing but falling snow and the dark outline of the trees. Still, she knew the man was out there now, and he hadn't come alone. The sound of the engine earlier wasn't a coincidence. Someone had brought him here, waited for him. And if they'd gone to the trouble of slipping under the house, they'd be back. She locked the hatch again and dragged the heavy coat rack from the hallway to cover it. It wouldn't stop someone determined, but it might slow them down. Thor returned to the door, lying down in front of it like a barrier she'd never asked for but couldn't imagine being without. She slid down the wall until she was sitting opposite him, the rifle across her lap. "Thor," she said quietly, testing the name again. His ears flicked toward her. "I don't know what they want with you," she continued, "but they're not getting you. Not tonight. Not ever." Outside, the snow kept falling, muffling the world in a blanket of quiet. But she knew, in the stillness between her breaths, that somewhere just beyond the trees, they were still there, watching. She didn't move for a long time. The only sound was the faint ticking of the baseboard heater and Thor's steady breathing. But her mind wouldn't let her rest, replaying the pale eyes in the flashlight beam, the way he hadn't seemed surprised to see her, or the dog. Eventually, she rose, rifle in hand, and went to check the windows. She kept the lights off this time, moving from one side of the house to the other, careful to stay back from the glass. The snow outside reflected the dim light from the porch, a soft glow that should have made movement easy to spot. Nothing. Thor shadowed her every step, padding silently from room to room. When she stopped, he stopped. When she shifted her weight toward another window, he was already halfway there. She made it to the kitchen window at the back of the house and froze. 2 sets of footprints in the fresh snow, leading away from the porch toward the tree line. Her stomach tightened. The crawl space intruder had an accomplice, maybe more than one. Thor pressed his nose to the glass, ears high, tail motionless. "They're regrouping," she murmured, not even sure why she was saying it out loud. Maybe because it helped her believe she still had control of the situation. A faint, deliberate crunch of snow outside broke the stillness. She couldn't see where it came from, but Thor could. His head turned sharply to the right, toward the far side of the house. She crossed quickly to the living room window, careful not to let her boots creak on the old boards. There, at the edge of the yard, half shielded by the trees, a figure stood watching. Same height, same build as the one from the crawl space. Still wearing the mask. The figure didn't move when she spotted them. She raised the rifle and sighted through the scope, not aiming to shoot but to see clearer. The glass caught the moonlight just enough to reveal the gleam of something in the figure's hand. It wasn't a weapon. It was a leash. Her breath caught. Thor's body stiffened beside her, a low growl starting in his chest. The figure seemed to notice, or maybe that was the point, because they slowly lifted the leash into the air, dangling it for her to see before dropping it into the snow. She didn't need to get closer to understand. It wasn't just a leash. It was the same style as the one that matched his harness, the one she'd found hidden in the wall. She turned to Thor. His eyes were locked on the figure, unblinking. When she looked back out the window, the figure was gone. A noise snapped her attention to the back of the house, the distinct sound of boots hitting the porch steps. She moved fast, keeping the rifle up, but before she could reach the door, a dull thunk hit the wood. Thor lunged forward, barking hard now, the sound shaking the walls. Another thunk. This time lower, closer to the floor. She edged toward the door and glanced down. Something slid through the gap at the bottom and landed on the mat. A folded piece of paper. Thor snarled, pressing his body between her and the door. She knelt, still keeping her distance, and used the end of the rifle barrel to hook the paper closer. It was wet from the snow, the ink bleeding into the fibers. She unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was cramped, uneven, but the words were clear enough. "Give him back, and we leave. Keep him, and you'll see us again." Her grip on the paper tightened until it crumpled in her fist. Thor had moved to the window now, front paws braced on the sill, tail rigid. She followed his gaze into the yard, but once again, whoever had been there was gone. The snow muffled everything, hiding their retreat. She dropped the paper on the counter, resisting the urge to burn it right there. Instead, she picked up her phone and typed a message to the deputy. 2 men. One under the house. Both masked. They know about Thor. She hit send, then stared at the screen until it lit up with his reply. "Stay inside. I'm 20 minutes out. Keep the dog close." Her eyes went to Thor. He was already close, closer than she'd ever thought a dog that wasn't hers would be. But the words on the paper wouldn't leave her mind. They weren't asking for money. They weren't making threats about her. Everything they wanted was about him. She glanced at the harness on the counter, the patches faded but still carrying the weight of whatever life he'd had before showing up at her door. Thor stepped closer, resting his head against her knee. It wasn't affection exactly, more like a silent acknowledgement that they both knew what they were in for. Outside, the snow kept falling, but it didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt like cover. The ticking of the clock on the kitchen wall was the only sound now. She kept checking it, knowing each glance would barely show a minute had passed. The deputy's message replayed in her mind, 20 minutes. By her count, 10 were gone. That meant 10 more to get through. Thor hadn't moved from his spot near the front window. He was sitting now, but every few seconds his ears would tilt, catching some sound she couldn't hear. She checked the back door again. The crumpled note sat on the counter where she'd dropped it, its wet edges curling as it dried. Her phone buzzed. She snatched it up, not another photo this time, but a short text from an unknown number. Last chance. Her chest tightened. A sound outside caught through the silence, faint at first, then louder. Boots and snow. More than one pair. Thor stood instantly, his body tense, eyes fixed on the front yard. She moved to the side window, crouching low. Shapes emerged from the shadows, two of them, both masked, both moving quickly but not rushing. Deliberate. They didn't go for the door. Instead, one circled toward the side of the house while the other disappeared into the darkness near the trees. Her grip on the rifle tightened. Thor moved toward the hallway, stopping halfway like he couldn't decide which direction to guard first. Then, the sound of metal scraping against metal. She spun toward the kitchen. The back door handle was rattling. Thor bolted, nails scraping the wood, barking hard and fast. The rattling stopped. For a moment, there was nothing, then a sharp bang against the door, enough to shake the frame. She raised the rifle, heart pounding. Another bang, this time lower, near the bottom. The door didn't give, but the sound of a muffled voice carried through, something she couldn't make out. Thor snarled, pressing himself against the door like he was trying to push them back with sheer force. Then, from the front of the house, a sharp crack. Glass. She turned just in time to see the curtain shift in the living room, the top edge jerking as someone tried to force the window. They were hitting both sides at once. She ran for the front, rifle raised. "Stop!" she shouted, loud enough to carry through the glass. A masked face appeared in the narrow gap, pale eyes locking on hers. Thor's bark tore through the space, bouncing off the walls. The man at the window froze, just for a second, then reached inside, fingers hooking on the latch. She didn't give him the chance to open it. One step forward, rifle up, her voice sharp, "Get away from my house." For a heartbeat, he didn't move. Then, slowly, he withdrew his hand, never breaking eye contact. The sound of tires crunching snow cut through the moment. Headlights swept across the yard. The masked man was gone in an instant, disappearing into the trees. Thor bolted for the back of the house, barking again. She followed, and caught sight of the second man sprinting across the yard toward the tree line. The deputy's SUV slid to a stop at the edge of the drive. He was out before the wheels had even settled, flashlight cutting across the snow. "They split," she called, pointing toward the trees. The deputy didn't hesitate, moving fast, the beam of light bouncing as he ran. Thor stood at the open door, muscles trembling, but when she called his name, he turned back toward her. She shut the door, locking it tight, then moved to check every window again. Outside, the deputy's voice carried faintly, calling out commands. Somewhere in the distance, snow crunched under heavy boots. Minutes later, the deputy reappeared, breathing hard, shaking his head. "They're gone." Tracks split in 3 directions. "I called for backup, but with the snow," he didn't have to finish the sentence. She knew what he meant. She told him about the crawl space, the note, the leash. His jaw tightened. "They'll be back." She glanced down at Thor, who stood pressed to her leg like he'd been there all his life. "Then so will we," she said. The deputy nodded once, then stepped outside to radio his report. When the door shut, she dropped to one knee in front of Thor. Her hand rested on his paw, just like it had the first night. "Please stay," she whispered. For the first time, Thor's tail moved, just a slow, single wag, like he understood. The snow kept falling outside, covering the footprints, erasing the trail, but it didn't matter. She knew in her bones they'd try again. And when they did, they'd find Thor waiting.